I'm going to introduce this thing. All right. Hello, everyone. We're here at the ARC conference in London. There's 4,000 people at this conference, but there were quite a few very interesting Orthodox artists present, so I thought let's gather us together and do a little roundtable discussion about the renewal of civilization from an arts and culture standpoint. We have here artist and illustrator Heather Pollington, Martin Shaw, author, mystic, hermit, Jonathan.
He nailed it. Poet. We forgot poet.
Very good. Jonathan Pageau, icon carver, runs the Symbolic World Publishing Company. We have Ben Stamper, filmmaker. Vesper Stamper, artist, illustrator, author. Andrew Gould, designer of Orthodox churches and other traditional style buildings, and I run the Orthodox Arts Journal. We have Aidan Hart, British iconographer. We have here Kate DeGraide and Neil DeGraide, composers, musicians, filmmakers, and John Heers, restaurateur, Tomada of Georgian feasts.
Yeah, I'll take it.
So, we've all been a bit frustrated here at the ARC conference because it's mostly
Speak for yourself,
well, what I mean is here at the ARC conference, the most of the speakers are kind of on the policy and economics end of things, and so when they talk about the renewal of civilization, they're mostly talking about legislation and human rights issues, but we artists want to talk about civilization from an arts and culture standpoint. So Aidan here, I know, was recently speaking about the topic of the effect of architecture and the environment on humanity. Would you like to?
Thank you, yes. I've been recently reading a book by Timothy Patitsas, and he talks about beauty first and then truth follows. And I think we tend now to think of beauty as the icing on the cake, but I think true beauty has a profound effect on the soul. I have a saying I've developed recently that we act as we see. So if there's wrong action, if our civilization is decaying, then the question we need to ask is, how are we seeing incorrectly? The Greek word for repentance, metanoia, means change of nous, and nous is often described as the eye of the heart. So a change of action is always preceded by a change of seeing. So I think the question, if our civilization is in crisis, what's wrong is because it's seeing incorrectly. Mm-hmm. And I was very interested in what Mike Johnson said today in one of the talks, is that the foundation of the concepts like human rights, human freedom, is that we're made in God's image. If you have a society that forgets that we're made in God's image, which is beautiful, then all the other structures that develop from that collapse. So to me, repentance is really to do with becoming beautiful again. Becoming beautiful again. And orthodoxy, of course, means right, glory, but doxa can mean teaching and worship, but also glory. So really orthodoxy can be, I think, understood as right beauty, becoming beautiful again. And I think architecture, which is your field, we were talking about this earlier, that in England, after the war, a lot of destruction had been wrought by bombing. They had to build lots of dwellings. So in Birmingham, near where I live, they built lots of really ugly, cheap concrete blocks. The social problems were enormous for that. It brutalised the people living there, and it became so expensive because of all the social problems. It was cheaper to blow these hideous things up, and I've got photographs that have been blown up, and then they invest more money in making something a bit more beautiful. So ugliness is oppressive. I often thought we should rewrite the Bill of Human Rights and include in that, I don't like the term of rights, but let's just say man has a right to beauty. It's not icing on the cake, it's a human need.
It's a need.
So a good civilization puts beauty at the heart of it. And it's town planning, it's architecture.
Absolutely, and of course, civilization somewhat specifically means civitas. It means city dwelling. A civilized people means people who live in cities as opposed to hunters-gatherers. And we can see, looking at the art of, I would say, the Victorian period more than any, that civilization was built largely through civic architecture. When the British Empire would go around the world, one of the first things they would do, in a sense, to civilize countries was build things like train stations and government buildings and so forth. And because these buildings were beautiful, it was actually a vision of civilization that people could understand and believe in. And I do feel that the habit of the modern world to build even public civic architecture ugly is surely one of the things that has made modern people lose faith in all of the systems and institutions that supposedly constitute civilization.
And it's interesting that the Bible begins with a garden but ends in a city. So the city should be the culmination of all human endeavour. Because the city is the union. Obviously in the Bible it's the union of the bride and the bridegroom, but it's also communion, a marriage of one to another, which is beautiful. That's probably the meaning of beauty. I mean, the word art means to fitly join together. It's its literal meaning. Comes from Ars Artist. And the city is described as a joining together, isn't it, of the architecture, the people. Do you think architecture can be described as a garment that's tailored to fit the body, and basically the ultimate city is a loving relationship with God? That's the body. So the architecture, as it were, should start with man made in God's image. And ugly architecture is like a misfitting suit that contorts me to get into it. Is that a good image?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there's a wonderful humanity in beautiful traditional architecture, that it's human scaled and it seems ennobled by the presence of people in it. One often gets the feeling with modernistic architecture that people are a sort of impurity imposed upon it. In magazines it's photographed empty with no people, looking pristine and clean. But then when these modern buildings are actually used for a few years and there's smudges where people have rubbed up against the walls and everything's getting patinated and discolored, the building starts to look kind of terrible. In contrast to traditional architecture built out of timber and stone, these buildings get more beautiful with age. The floors get polished by people walking on them, the timbers get burnished, the stones get beautifully discolored where people brush against them, and you look at a 500-year-old stone and timber building, and most of its beauty is the beauty of the people who have been using it for 500 years. It really does have a symbiotic relationship with humanity.
There's also in Revelation, when it talks about the New Jerusalem, it says that that Jerusalem is adorned like a bride prepared for her groom. So there's a sense in which the wall of the city, now that's made out of precious jewels and is gold, is a vestment, right? It is that wedding dress that the civilization is putting on to encounter the Son of Man.
That's nice. Well, I've been getting into something kind of strange, which is every once in a while on Netflix I'll pull up one of these ancient civilization documentaries. And, well, why am I bringing that up? Well, because I want to talk about something I think we don't see often, like we can maybe bring into the conversation, which is that as soon as civilizations began to appear and to develop architecture and buildings, they were attuned to what was above, the heavens. And there seemed to be a natural human impulse to connect the heavens and the earth in that capacity, whether it's the pyramids that are aligned to the radius of the earth or the astronomical events. And when I go out and look at architecture and the way we're building cities now, I don't ever hear a discussion of that impulse or see that that's what people are trying to do anymore. So I'm always trying to get to the bottom of how did this happen, because I think this is, well, as a Christian, the Lord's Prayer, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I think this is something innate to us that God put in us, that either our technological build or the pace of our culture, or what we're doing, is kind of blurred the idea that this is one of the points of architecture. Have you guys put much thought into this?
The early architecture of the earliest stuff we have, like, I can't remember what the Sumerian things are called. Some of them are those temples where they have to walk up all the steps.
Yeah.
And it's very narrow. They're very controlled. And what I find fascinating is that they stay very controlled, more individual, or moved, only the priests can use them, or the elite can use them. And then when you get to Christianity, the basilicas are fascinating because the Christians are the first people to gather as a community. A large building that will accommodate many people in the building. And so when they're looking to retrofit a building in Rome, they don't turn to the temples, they turn to the basilicas, which are supports law because they're actually large enough to hold up.
That's a great call.
That was a great point. I accept it.
No.
Do I see another hand in the audience?
She just runs away.
I told the truth. She runs away.
I feel like we saw this at the Guildhall. Like, I mean, just that building's glorious, and it's built on on a Roman amphitheater, and the beauty is like we're supposed to be reminded of what we're fighting for, right? Or the English were. I was so overwhelmed by the beauty of that building. And,
Yeah.
It reminds you what you won.
Yeah, even in civic architecture, secular civic architecture of the 19th century, there is a cosmic symbolism in it. Like in the U.S. Capitol building, it's got a huge dome representing sort of universal dominion, and at the top of the dome is painted the apotheosis of George Washington. It's sort of the civic pantocrator, America's God up there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and then it has the sense of sprawling out as a big four-square footprint up on a hill that's like dominion over the four corners of the world. Classical architecture has a lot of the same symbolism that we see in Orthodox churches.
Yes.
With the dome of heaven and the square of the earth and the union of the two. But you're absolutely right that modern civic architecture, modernistic architecture, is anti-symbolism. It's abstract forms that the architect may claim they symbolize something or other, but it's something personal that is only meaningful to him. It's not something universally recognizable.
Do you think, as well as architecture fitting the human person made in God's image, it can also work the other way, where it's actually larger and more sublime than we are, so we actually expand into it. We go into a beautiful building, and actually it says you're not a groveling worm. You're actually a prince. Stand up and fill that space. Can it work that way as well? Actually, it's ahead of you as well as fitting you.
Yeah,
It's just a thought I've had now. Is that?
When St. Maximus, he talks about the cosmos as macroanthropos, right? The idea that on the one hand we are a microcosm of the cosmos, but the cosmos is an expansion also of the human, and that's necessarily so because we also are the ones to perceive it. We're the ones to give it meaning and to engage with it, and so it appears, and so it's normal that people would build these buildings that would be almost like kind of like this expansion of the human scale into the cosmic. That's probably why we feel the way we do, partly in these buildings. Rather, the difference between, for example, here, like this building here where we are, it's so arbitrary. Like everything about it is arbitrary.
Disjointed.
The spaces are contrived, and the sizes are weird. We don't totally understand what these large halls that are just very strange and abstract. And so everybody feels awkward in the space and kind of disoriented. It doesn't actually know how, and it's made to know what to do and where to go, but you actually feel the opposite.
Can I tell you the architecture of a table at a supra? If you try to do it at a circle, immediately the tamada is confusing. Who's the leader of the table? Who will do the toast? And immediately the toasts become democratic in nature. You see it all the
You
time.
lose the head of the table.
And you really can speak that you can still be the head and present as an image of the head, but the toasts change. Much like if you build a certain kind of building within it, I might grow into it. You change the table and the toasts change, and the way people interact change. And better or worse, you can argue, but you can't do a super the same way. You can't do a Georgian feast the same way. It changes it.
That's the novelty of King Arthur and the Roundtable, right? There's an equality to the perceptions in that setting.
Right.
And there's moments where that's good, but also you don't know where to look. Like we were used to focusing on a thing, and the other things blur into the periphery.
Did you feel that in the room today?
Yeah.
Did you feel it? I think everyone wants to say God, but you said it last year.
I said it this year.
You said it this year, yeah.
How dare you?
I think there's a lot of people said it.
No,
Mike
not
Jonathan
more.
said
I
it.
was surprised how much
But
they
last
By the
year,
way-
very few people said it.
By the way, I think a lot of people, in my opinion, today did try.
Oh, yeah.
But there was a lot of vocabulary, but I wonder if the hall, when they understand anthros as made in God's image, I think we say it. I don't think we really know what that's a crazy concept. That's the way it. I'm not sure people actually believe it. I'm not sure I even believe it half the time, you know? And I kept seeing that in there, which is like, do they know what they're saying? I don't know.
I'm interested, Martin, that the phrase you use, you're like an architect of words. You said you want to rehydrate the expression of the Christian truth. So we're talking about an architecture that, as it were, follows archetypes, so there's a continuity, but you're wanting to say the same things, but in a fresh way that wakes us up, that, it's like each actually Orthodox church can, 10 Orthodox churches equally beautiful, but there's diversity. So each one of those must have been a little bit different than what people have seen before, enough to wake them up. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about this rehydrating the expression of timeless truths.
Well, whenever a culture is in crisis, the genius required never comes from the centre of the round table. It comes from the edge. It's something that the Kalahari Bushmen know. This obsession with screens that we have, it's hypnotic and it's trance-involving. And good Christianity causes you to see out of the edges of your vision all these strange trembling bells that are around us. So that's why you have all these Arthurian knights charging off all of the time into the forest. Now only yesterday, I was at liturgy in Galway, and it was a wonderful experience. The deep interior was reached, and then someone asked me, what was the most meaningful part of the liturgy for you yesterday? I said it was when the door briefly opened and I heard seagulls. That was the moment. That was the moment. And that's the Irish in me. That's the Irish in me, where it is. We talked today about the notion that the soul is probably much bigger than the body. We're always gesturing to our chest, but any Aboriginal understanding, for me, a deeply Christian understanding of the soul is something that you go walkabout in. And so when you build culture, and I'm a fan of Christian culture, I believe in Christian culture, but the word culture comes from koller, which means to dig. It means to dig. So as artists, we dig. Whether, as Seamus Heaney says, we dig with our pen, or we dig with our quill, or we dig with our spade, we're involved in something that actually is taking us down. I'm interested in the Christianity of the Lascaux Caves, as well as I am the Notre Dame Cathedral. I'm interested in a way the underworld of Christianity, as well as the overworld, that once you can design things, you have a different kind of sacred space to going into the caves. And just because of the way some of you will know the story of how God revealed himself to me, it came in a very unusual fashion. And I have to be loyal. Here's a lovely. I will be loyal to the bells of my village. I will be loyal to the bells of my experience. And that is telling me to keep an eye out for the gospel of the cormorant and the gospel of the seagulls and the gospel of the green teeth of the river. Anyway, sorry, I'm taking up space.
Well, that's beautiful.
When I was a hermit,
It's a good space.
It reminds me of a time that I gave a drink of water to a friend in this great glass. It was this green goblet that we had, and it was just this really handcrafted, hand-blown glass cup, and he and it was very heavy. And he picked it up and he took a swig of water and he said, "That is a Christian drink." What he was saying, I think it touches on what you're saying, Martin, is this idea that there's Christian culture, that's like a testament, to what Christian culture can be, something that has weight and that has substance, that is rooted in reality. It's rooted in something that has it extends beyond its use, and I always remember that because it can transform a cup of water and give it something. It's like its full essence of its wateriness.
Well, consider how material things are able to bring out the image of God in people. That, of course, clothes are ennobling. Someone wearing really beautiful clothes, looks like. Thank you. Looks like a far more complete human being, a more noble creature. And architecture, of course, does this as well. Just yesterday, I was touring Hampton Court Palace, and I was so struck that in the setting of that palace and gardens, just seeing another person, a tourist, anybody, in that setting, they look like princes and princesses. I was just amazed how beautiful people look like. They look like storybook characters, like more real than the mundane people of the everyday world. And a whole city can do this, of course. When you're in a really beautiful historic city where all the buildings and streets are beautiful, people seem more real than when you're in an ugly city and people seem like mere shadows of themselves, mindless ghosts suffering through life.
Sort of the Giacometti sculptures, the people wandering, and the very thin sculptures
That's
where
right.
they're wandering in space, but they're not interacting. And they're walking in different directions, and they're never intersecting.
So I see beautiful civic art and architecture in general as, in a way, an analogous project to the work of churches, of actually trying to make the image of God shine through us more clearly.
Do you remember the old Ethiopian idea that a church is a little dodgy if there isn't a forest around it? No. Wonderful. Yes, a lot of these Ethiopian churches, they build forests around the church because the church on its own is going to die of loneliness. It's going to die of loneliness if it doesn't have a forest around it. I'm thinking now of the great patron saint of Orthodoxy, William Blake, who would say Jesus is the imagination. And you can't be a Christian without becoming an artist, because once that wily, quixotic teacher gets inside you, he's going to bend your head, and you're going to start seeing the fall, and you're going to start seeing the rapture and everything else that is happening through his eyes. And I just wonder, throwing the question out to us, if you could make a city, what would it look like? What would yours look like?
Do you think every every city needs its prophets, and the prophets need a city? So the idea of the seagull outside, sort of flying around free.
Yeah.
The seagull by itself without the church would be incomplete, and the church without the forest, the ocean.
Yeah.
When I was a hermit, I had this frescoed chapel, which is like the city. You had all the saints around, it was organised, you had a geometric pattern on the floor. So I spent a lot of time there praying the liturgy, which is like the work of a city, if you like. But then also I'd go up to the hills, the wild hills, the cypress stones, to pray the Jesus prayer. And one needed the other.
That's it. It's the thread. It's why we need the monastics so desperately. But there's something about chivalry. There's something about gallantry. There's something about that happened in the 12th and 13th century that it has enormous clues for us as Christians that are going to have families and we're going to have kids and we're going to have to reach out and touch the world. And the wonderful thing is we don't have to choose one over the other. We can live, as the psychologists say, in the tension of the opposites. So as Christians, we are both steadfast and restless. And I think that's artistically cool.
There was a few years ago, we were in the Tate Modern, and my family knows this was a really rough experience for me. I don't do well with brutalism. And the entire time that we were in there, I felt like the building was going to fall down on me. I felt extremely threatened and claustrophobic. And as we're talking, I was thinking about that experience as, the Tate is built as a temple to art, And in all of this civic architecture that you're talking about, there's a sense in which these buildings are temples to human beings, whether it's a civic building or a church, that they're ennobling to the human being, right? But when you have a temple to art, it's kind of like the underworld, it's the upside down of that, And you can feel like the artwork is sort of this disembodied thing that we worship, and it doesn't have anything to do with you, it's externalized. And this is a really modern thing.
Yeah.
When we started building these temples to art or taking art out of the churches or out of the palaces and putting them in their own buildings, it was at the time where the conception of the human being was really like falling apart.
Yeah.
And so now we have this myth of the genius artist as the person to be worshipped, as the entity to be worshipped, and the things that they make. But you can just as easily fake those things, if they're not connected to the human person creating them, from a body that's just one of you. You know what I mean?
Something you said here today really struck me, your set designer in films. You said the first thing is to capture the spirit, understand the spirit of that epoch, whatever, and all the details had to be true to that spirit, otherwise it doesn't work, it dries.
Yeah,
so sort of what you're saying, you've got to know what why you're creating that city, why you're creating that building, have a vision. And if it's an ungodly vision, it would be an ungodly
And if
building.
these are sort of temples to human beings in a way, right? It's because we're made in the image of God that we deserve it, in a sense, you know. And so if it's removed from the human aspect of it, and it's just a temple to itself, that's why it feels like, to me, hell.
But I think also I think that's talking about the intent of the architect, but also I think it's important to consider the patterns of humans and how they move through space and what space does to them, because good architecture or good art in general, it includes that information in its design. And so that why do you walk into a building and suddenly feel at ease? It's likely because it follows the patterns of human nature and accommodates, it's a human-centric.
I was talking to Andrew today about the layout when we had lunch, and I think that's the most thing that's most disturbing about the ARC environment is, because I didn't understand at first, I was like, why are we directed like this? And Andrew said, it's a completely flexible space, so you can open all those doors and reconfigure the whole thing. And I realised there isn't even a single purpose to the thing that we're in, which is why we all feel strange. Like even a modernist building would have a sense of an entrance and an exit, but this is even worse.
It feels like a laboratory rat maze. They keep opening a door or moving a wall to see if the rat can figure out where to go next.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that's true.
Like an IQ test almost.
But when we were in the film world, it's like architecture kind of on steroids, because everything gets decided very quickly, and you basically have a story or an idea. And we'd have to move quite quickly and test it. And actually, we always found that building something is a way of testing out your ideas. So I know you said at the beginning, Aidan, it's like you have the principle has to be right at first, which is true. But then the process of building will test those ideas out and show things that are false, that could fall away. And I've had the sense at the last arc and this one indeed that some of the ideas I've been hearing don't quite cohere, they're inconsistent, and what I want to say is, like, show me the building that represents that philosophy, and then we can see what it is, because at the moment that to me doesn't make sense. You can't build that temple.
It feels disembodied.
Yeah.
It's not a civilization that exists.
But a church can stand because there's been thought about how to represent that.
There was the one talk about energy where it was presented as a positive that people were pulled out of the fields and put into factories, and I thought, what?
Heartbreaking. Heartbreaking.
Yes.
No.
In America, there used to be a phrase, the palace of the people. When the Victorian era, Americans built these huge domed Capitol buildings, the state houses, that's what they called them, as a palace of the people, to distinguish them from a palace for the king or the aristocrat in the old world. And yet these buildings, they actually are kind of laid out like palaces. They'll have a huge sort of rotunda and grand staircase that's mainly for the purpose of seeing well-dressed people coming and going, put on, theatrically on display, and then they have exits out to the grounds and the gardens just in every direction. You can just come into the building, you can see and be seen, you can walk out. It's a very old-fashioned aristocratic concept of civic architecture. In fact, all of those state houses have to have another ugly modern building next to them or buried in the earth under them, where they have all of the offices with secure corridors and locked doors. That's where the real business takes place, because really the actual palace of the people, it's totally public. It's designed that way. But those buildings, they have the ennobling quality that all these talks we're hearing at ARC are about, of the fullness of human civilization. People have to interact, they have to see each other, they have to go up and look down, and go down and look up, and everybody can find their place in a building like that. The extroverts can come out under the dome, and the introverts can walk back under the balconies, and it's really beautiful.
Human-centered.
Yeah. It's where you contrast that to a modern building that's designed as a machine for some social purpose, compare a classical art museum that's sort of like what I just described to Frank Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim Art Museum in New York, where the only way to go to that museum is you take an elevator to the top and then you walk down the descending helical ramp, and then you get spat out the bottom. It's like you can only use that building one way, so the people in the building just feel like ball bearings, going down a kinetic sculpture. They don't, there's no place for people to have any individuality in that concept of architecture.
I'm interested to know from like the musical we've been talking a lot about architecture, but like from the musical perspective, how can you create a space for people?
The thing that keeps coming to my mind, which I'm certainly not an expert, but is that today I kept having people come to me and tell me that the songs were their favorite part. Our song, and then someone else sang too. And
They were talking to us, they're very nice.
Yeah, but no, but many times it was like that was the moment for me.
Yeah.
Thanks, Neil. And and that's that represented 10 minutes maybe.
Yeah.
At least the songs.
Right.
And so I do think that something can get across through music
Yes.
It's like a super
that can
highway.
pierce the heart if it's beautiful music.
Well, it's a presentational art. It's not representational. We can't explain exactly why it worked. How do we take these frequencies and time and turn them into something we can name and have a feeling about that you can't experience all at the same time? It's linear, like reading versus looking at a picture, which is simultaneous. So music, it falls into a linear art. But when I think about what you guys are talking about too, so this is something I've been working on in music a lot, because it's very hard in just music to point at a thing. Like, what thing are you pointing out to me? What does that remind me of? It's like, you can think of classical pieces like Peter and the Wolf, where it's mimicking animal behavior and stuff, and you can get a sense on why these things translate back and forth. But I think that part of the problem of what we're talking about, and it has hit the music industry and it's hit architecture and civilization in general, is that I have so much abstract art I really love. And because I love the game of abstract art to a point where it is, how far can we take it from what you're familiar with and you still see the golden thread in the image? And there's some abstract art that does that so wonderfully. But the exploration of that also began to blur what things really are and what they're not. Because, for example, if people on both sides, and someone in Hollywood gets up and they're like, they state their political views, you're fine with it until you disagree, and then you're like, artists should shut up about their political views. Right? It's because, so the problem with the naming and the definitiveness and the idea that we're looking for something objective, a solid place to stand, that doesn't afford people their own dominion. So there was something about abstraction where that blur, like, you go to the art museum with your art teacher, and I'm in Boston, this actually happens, and we're looking at this abstract piece of art, and he's like, what do you guys think it is? And someone's like, it's a Mediterranean villa. And the other person's like, it's a duck. And you're like, this is not necessarily helpful. Like, this is a weird game. But that blur allows us what? It affords us the opportunity to take sort of that idea of God naming and deciding and ordaining and bring it into our own hands and using it for our own purposes. So I think this is part of what we're fighting against, is that when things point, it doesn't fit the modern mindset that we've been brought up on, where the subjective is what's important.
We live in a culture that supports any spiritual seeker. They're going to hate you if you find something.
You experience this yourself.
They're going to hate you
Just
when
stay
you find
lost.
something. Now, Tolkien had a very interesting thing to say about Irish myth. He said, Irish myth, as opposed to Anglo-Saxon or the wonderful Norse pantheon, he said it's like a beautiful stained glass window that someone has chucked a stone through. He said it is unreasoned. And he said the Irish are unreasoned. Yeah. And I'm writing a book at the moment explaining why that's part of the genius of the Irish. And actually, as an artist, as a bricoleur, there's a lot you can do with things when you're left in the rubble. Don't despair. Take courage. Take courage. Because actually, and I think this leads us towards talking about orthodoxy. Orthodoxy I find tremendously interesting as an artist, because from a distance it looks like it's all about tradition. But you get in there, and there's tremendous creative vitality. And actually, simply by the business of being troubled human beings, we can't help but keep the thing moving along. But often it's about accident rather than a trance state, with innovation and originality being the thing. When the thing comes, God is in the house.
Then when people often ask me if I'm making icons, how do I express myself, or should I express myself, or should I even think about that? And I always tell them, just do the thing, and then you'll be in there. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
If you worry about it, that's when it becomes weird. But if you just do the thing and you make the images in service of God and in service of the church, then people will see your hand in there. But you don't have to make it the purpose.
Yeah, art, as it turns out, is not primarily a form of self-expression.
Yeah,
Right.
but I mean, I can recognize
Yeah.
Aidan's icon from like very far away. I'm like, oh, that's Aidan's icon.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
That's not the point
that's
of
not
what
the
he's
point.
doing.
Yeah,
Exactly.
It's fascinating how in the book of Revelation it talks about a name being given to someone. They don't take it, they don't invent it, and often it's written on the forehead in one verse. I can't read my own forehead. You've got to reveal my name to me.
Beautiful.
So if immediately I make up a name, it doesn't really express me. And Saint Seraphim said that when Adam named the animals, it wasn't arbitrary. He perceived the logos of that animal, and that name was a manifestation of the character of that particular thing.
I think a lot about the current mindset of artists as activists, and it seems like it's you start with the activism, you start with the message that you want to convey, and you sort of apply it to a medium, whether that's painting or music or architecture, whatever. And this is why it doesn't feel right, because it's applied. It's not coming from the soul or from the heart. And I think a lot about how, as artists, we begin the work in the body. We receive stimulus, we process it through our five senses before it's pre-verbal, and that's where the work comes from, and that's the work that people respond to on that same pre-verbal level, because they're feeling it in their own bodies. Whereas when you start with a kind of message-based or vehicle-based kind of thing, it's forgettable. It's instantly forgettable. It doesn't touch people on that level. And I think that it doesn't matter what your political persuasion is. People on the left can do it. People on the, I see the conservatives trying to, get into the art making world, and a lot of it is really bad. I'm sorry, I'm going to say it.
No one here. That's for sure.
No, but a lot of it is really bad, because it's like, well, we have the moral of the children's book. Have a book about this thing, and it's that's not what stories are.
You almost killed Martin with that one.
But that's not what a story is.
I saw his soul start to leave his body.
And he died in front of me.
It was a sad day.
But it's not what a story is. It's not what a book is. It's not what a child is.
Yes.
And what about the healing aspect of art as a creator? Not just the art we make for others, but what it does to you to create art, and how that changes society. Like how many addictions have been healed through learning to garden or taking up a craft. Like we need art to heal also.
Because it
Individually.
requires the artist presence, human presence.
Right.
It
Yeah.
requires us to be present and hold the thing.
I think something Aidan said at the beginning was terribly important. Beauty. And beauty, the etymology of the word, is Anglo-French, and there's beaut in it. And it's also to do with, a wonderful thing about beauty, in the etymology of the word, is to do with actually how you behave. It's to do with courtesy. So with brigands like us, the good news is that we can work on ourselves. So in other words, there's the best form of beauty has theosis in it. And theosis, from an Irish perspective, would be this phrase, and I'm going to give you gold now. Cop onto yourself. Cop onto yourself.
What does
that
mean?
mean?
It means
Cop
cop.
on?
It means be wise to your nonsense. Be wise to your
Be
nonsense.
attentive to thyself.
Cop onto yourself is better. Try that in a Galway bar and see how it goes. I love the notion that real beauty actually has trouble in it, because reverie always leads to participation. It's not passive, actually. Beauty is going to open a door, and if ever I meet someone who is significantly irritated by the Christian part of my life, which is my whole life, you'll go to beauty, lean into beauty, find out what temple they serve in, because we're all serving in one or another, and take it from there. But this notion of beauty and how we recognize it, very interesting to me.
The art of Tamada in Georgia is a oral tradition handed down. There's a debate about how far down. Some people say it's really 17th century. I think it goes back to the agape feast. The Tamada's job is to literally not think about what he wants you to know, but it's to imbibe what you need as per this moment. And so there's something about what then you were saying is the artist's job is to fall back, right? And to fall into everyone else. And so I like the idea you're really adhering to others and making the art. And it really resonates as a Tamada because there's so many times you want to tell the table about what they should know. Which I think that's bad art. That's the art you're describing. But somehow you have to say something. And so I find myself imbibing you in the moment, and then the toast to all of us is really about you. And it's not about me if I do it right. But it's hard to do it right.
I think it's revealed through the doing.
Yeah.
You know, it's not applied through my will, but it's by making the thing that's occurring to me to make at the time, it reveals its own meaning. Yeah.
Is that the equivalent of a novelist would often say, you've got to show, not tell. You've got to be the thing. That's right. Let it be completed in the reader. Now, I get what they're getting at now. They haven't told me, but they've manifested it in the story. That's right.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier about beauty and how, you know, if what Jesus said, if the eye is bad, the body is full of darkness, and the opposite is true as well, you know. And if the eye is good, the body is full of light. You know, our work as artists, the real work is done behind closed doors. The real work is done offline, and so that we can bring an offering that isn't centered on ourselves. You know?
Is that why do you think one of the central books in Orthodoxy is the Philokalia, the love of the beautiful? And what it's about? It's all about the inner life. I was looking at the original Greek of the prodigal son story, and the original Greek can be translated as, and he came into himself. Before, they'd been wandering around in the material world. And when all the material world had been wasted, he returned into himself, went to his monastic cell, went into the closet and prayed, and that became beautiful. He remembered the beauty of his home, then returned. But it's that
Tolkien calls that the recovered thing. He has this idea that it's great to always have something, but to lose something and find it again has an entirely different energy to it. The recovered thing you will treasure, you will hold on to.
Well, and you'll have a reasonable defense for it. So when something, as a kid, we receive stuff implicitly, we take it for granted, and then maybe we move away from it. And then we don't know it was good until we start to feel the loss of it. And sometimes you don't even know what you've lost and where you're looking for it and where did I lose it. And then, but when it's recovered, if it's recovered correctly, you don't just get it back, you get the ability to defend it to yourself and to others back.
Isn't that the energy of the convert? That's what you see. Some would say, no, they got something new, but I think they were returning to what they already were on that level. Because there's a lot of energy in these converts. I know.
But hold on.
I've heard about these guys.
How dare you?
These
Calm down,
converts.
John. We
these
can't all be
converts.
cradle.
The only cradle, I think.
Is there a cradle here? I don't think so.
You?
You.
No, you're not
No,
cradle.
I'm
No,
30,
you're not.
30 years.
I saw a picture of him when he
I'm
was
40
20. He was
years.
definitely
I'm
not
always
cradle.
crazy.
Close enough.
40 years. No, not 40, 43 years.
Oh, so he wins.
You win.
I'm a dinosaur.
You win.
Yeah.
What
almost
about? Oh, sorry.
extinct.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask a question because there's a thing that happens, and I want to know. There's a part sometimes when I talk about art, it's a reverse engineering of something that's happening to me intuitively, in the sense that my process does not reflect the way I talk about it after. Do you guys resonate with that? Well, I don't mean to, but so what you do is you can kind of like I'll have moments, things will hit me. I'll be working out a problem, like in the world, in my life. I'll cry, I'll pound the floor when I'm creating. Like, I'm weird and emotional, like, not, well, you guys probably can guess that. So, anyway, but I get really, like, my whole self gets involved in it, and I'm not truly thinking. Like, I wouldn't say I'm thinking.
Right.
And you do it, and for some reason, something just lands with you. Like, when someone gives you a riddle and you go away and you solve it, you know you had the right answer, even though the person isn't there to tell you because it locked, it landed. And something locks and it lands, and I love it, and I fight for it, and I make it come into existence, and then I figure out why. And then I talk about that. But that's not how it came to me, you know what I mean? So, like, because we're talking about this intentionality, and I don't know how to, my worst stuff I've done is someone hired me for a project with a goal, with an outcome, here's what I wanted to do to the audience, and it's like, I don't know how to do that. Like, if you ask me to do it that way, I don't know how. But do you guys feel that way? Can you, like what we're talking about, can you think about it and then go and do something and make it achieve that in Civilization? Or is it just something you're in tune with and hopefully it has that effect?
Well, civilizational art is the opposite of what you're saying, in the sense that, let's say, Aidan or Andrew and I, if we make icons, we are making something that is commissioned. Someone asks for something, and then you attend to their need, and then you adapt, obviously, your skill and your thought to that need. And so there's a discussion between the patron and the person doing it. But I also know what you mean. Like in other ways, like with stories and other parts of my creative life, I have more of that experience, which is more of the something just drops into you, and you don't know.
And you love it. It's got to exist, because that's how I started as an
Yeah,
artist.
yeah,
There were movies I couldn't see. My parents went to see Jaws or something like that. I couldn't see it. And so, Mom, tell me about Jaws. Oh, well, I can tell you about it. So I went home and drew it. I drew the panels. I'm like, Mom, my clothes, is this what it looked like when the kid got bitten in half? And because I wanted to see it so bad, but that's never stopped. That's always the thing. So I do feel like a little bit of a fraud when I talk about it on the other end, because I think that's what's happening. It's just me reverse engineering the intuitive process. But what you're talking about with Civilization art makes perfect sense to me. I just don't live there, so I guess I should leave the table.
This raises us, Martin, when I asked you how you write. You said you tend to write in two phases. The first is about 2 in the morning, and it's as though, talking about Ian McGilchrist, the left and right side of the brain, you deliberately don't stand over and judgment your book is right. 90% is rubbish, you said. Then the next day, when your rational faculty is alert, then you will critique your work. So you're allowing your intuition, your whatever, to do the right side of your brain, to do the main work. Then the judgment is more. But if you do it the other way around, it doesn't work.
Yes,
No, I get stuck in the mud.
Wouldn't you say that you have daytime intelligence and nighttime intelligence?
sure.
Absolutely.
And once night falls, you should make no lasting decisions. I
100%.
know in my own life.
The werewolf comes out.
But have you tried? And you get up in the morning and you look at the thing you did, and you're like, what was I thinking?
But what I would say, I think really great art should have a secret in it that the artist knows nothing about.
Yes.
It just has to,
Yeah.
and it will reveal itself to you over time. And often, if you're on a book tour and you're 30 gigs in and you've been saying the same old thing, and then one day the penny will drop, or a divine wind comes through, and you go, actually, it was this. I'll have to leave in a second, but I'll leave you with this thought. I've been working on a book for 2 years, which is quite a long time for me. And I was sitting in bed proofreading the book, and suddenly I wrote one sentence, and the sentence was this: in each experience of beauty, we are being prepared for eternity. In each experience of beauty, we are being prepared for eternity. And it was a little overwhelming, because I realized at that moment that was what the secret of the book had arrived, but not the secret of the book, the secret of my whole life.
Yes.
It's hard for me to talk about. So, amen for that arriving ahead of time and preparing me. But, we talk about eternity, and it's easy to terrify people once you get into medieval images of bubbling cauldrons and cherubs on clouds. They both seem as bad as each other in a strange kind of way. But what folks will roll with, is if you say, look, the thing that you lean into when you're alive picks up a kind of magnetic pace, and it's likely that when you die, you find yourself living in the consequence of where you lent to in this universe. There's very few people that actually get upset about that. They go, oh, it kind of follows. So in other words, you've started to map out a bit of theology, but in a way that doesn't immediately trigger them. So in other words, I think beauty for me matters because it changes the way I behave. Beauty was the thing that took me from Paul's notion of an unknown God into a known God. And the known God turned up, and he had a little bit of a mission statement, living in the consequence of that ever since. I have to go to dinner. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Well, in closing, I want to say something about the church architecture that I do. There are certain moments when I'm standing in my own church during a service, and I'll look back into the congregation, and I'll be shocked to see some individual back there looking as beautiful as any saint in the icons. It might be because there's a sunbeam coming through a window and it just falls on a woman in a colorful headscarf, and she's juxtaposed against an arch with a shadow behind it, and it's suddenly a little moment that's as beautiful as any oil painting. It's like a Rembrandt, sort of this inner illumination shining through in a beautiful architectural setting, and she'll sort of visually join in with the frescoes of the saints on the walls and really look like an icon of a saint. And that when I see something like that, I feel like that is the actual end purpose of my art, is a moment like that. When I get to feeling like the physical building that I'm trying to design or build is the end purpose of my work, I get kind of depressed, because it's just a dead object and it won't last forever. But when I see that the light and shadow and beauty in the building I've created has caused some person in that building to suddenly experience theosis, like I can see the divine image in that person because of the setting, I feel like, that's why I do this. My work is complete now. I'd like to ask the rest of you if you have similar stories. I'm guessing all of you, the different media or genres of art you work in, I'll bet all of you have a similar moment where you actually see some person using your art or hearing your song, reading your book, venerating your icon, and you see a moment of that divine beauty in humanity because of how they're interacting with your art. Do you feel similar that that's the end point, is when you see a moment like that?
I suppose my equivalent experience of that was in this hermitage where I lived for 7 years as a hermit. I frescoed this small chapel. And I continued doing the rest of the buildings up. So sometimes I'd have 16 tons of stone delivered, and one load arrived, and the man said, "Well, what are you doing?" And I told him, and I said, "Come and have a look at the hermitage, at the chapel rather." So I went in, and he came in, and I stood there, and I noticed he didn't say anything. So I just looked at him, and he was crying. A big muscly man, tattoos and everything. And I've not seen anything like this in my life before. And it wasn't so much the physical beauty, it's got really dark, deep, rich colours. I created an atmosphere, it's like the inner heart. I thought it worked.
I want to share one from our Art of Tamada. There's a young man that came to learn this oral tradition. And he came the very last day and he was very afraid. His name was Ethan. And just last week, I got a call from his parents that he had taken his life. Remember him? He was very happy to see you. And that week, 4 of the people that came to learn this tradition toasted him on the 5th toast, which is the toast to the souls of the dead. And they toasted him at their homes, much like you did at their homes, and then sent a video to our group of them toasting to this gentleman that they had met. And I cried like a baby, not unlike you must when you see people worship in the church. It's so similar, I had to share that. Because then his name is again remembered at the tables, at the altar of others, and it just goes out into eternity. And it's the most beautiful thing. Of course, not his death, but the idea that we haven't forgotten that. And the table teaches us that as an art form.
I'd like to share a memory answering that question. I had written a film that was to be acted by deaf people, and I wrote a scene for this one actor to recite this monologue about losing her hearing and what it was like when the hearing, when she was born hearing, but then she lost it, and what that experience was like. Now, this actress was she was born deaf, but she was interested in doing this scene, and so I had to write this, just sort of using my, just trusting that this would translate, and that she would be able to do it, because everything was in sign language, And so I wrote the scene, having no experience in this world, just purely using my imagination, but trying to do it in a way that felt true. And after we did that scene, she just said that was the greatest gift that you could have given me, because I could imagine what it was like to hear.
You found your way in.
Yeah. Because it was all imagery. It was all using sound as imagery. Wow. And she said that it brought her closer to what it must be like to hear. And I had never expected that. But I was, like you say, I was in the flow, and I was just trusting. And then to have that experience, it was like, this is why I'm doing this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I get these emails from people who are like, they're at their end of their rope, and I'm grateful that they reach out to me, but it actually breaks my heart too. Like, sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, this record helped me so much. And it's like, how is the world such a desert of encouragement that some artist who just made an album you liked, like, brought you back from the brink in any capacity? It's just, it's terrifying to think that some people live in that world. And so that helps when I don't want to get up and work. Sometimes like, well, maybe this is one of those things for someone else.
If it makes you feel better, I cried when Prince died, so don't worry.
Oh, yeah. So me too. He's awesome. Sorry.
I don't think I've had a live performance in my life that I've been satisfied with. I come away disappointed with myself every time, and yet people will come to me and say that so moved me or whatever, and that's the redeeming moment, and so it's like, I know that I have my own issues that make me a perfectionist and whatever, and I can't enjoy it, like maybe I will one day when I grow up, but that them being moved is the fulfillment of it. That's why you do it, I'm wondering, and I'm sorry if I'm changing the subject, you can shut me up, but my question that keeps coming to mind when I'm listening is, like, if we go back to like a political thing, like people do things because there's laws, but what about the idea that it's better to do things because of beauty, to be inspired, to be right, and to operate rightly, rather than be made through laws or legislation, or like a man who's fallen in love with a beautiful woman, and how would he change to win her,
Well, it's like, lovers will always be better workers. It's kind of like, no one has to tell you if you're in love to go to the ends of the earth for your beloved.
To be good. To be good.
You'll do anything.
And what about Christians will be known for their love?
Yeah.
Like, it goes back to that there's a better reason to do things than politics.
Yeah, no, trying to make something beautiful is an act of love, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Definitely.
I think what I want to share is, when I was watching Andrew describe that moment in church, what it reminded me of is how a film director thinks, because when filmmaking is human-centered in that way, we actually think about a shot, a face, and then we put the architecture and the design around them, around the human. And I'm so used to that language and that way of working, I did that for 20 years, and then when I went back to church, it was absent. And I think that's what I noticed, was this isn't human-centered in the way that my brain works, because I was looking at the environment and thinking, how does this frame the parishioners, or how does this make the parishioner feel? Or, as a filmmaker, you think where the camera is in terms of close-ups and how you might be interacting with details of the church, like candles or an icon. And that had kind of gone out of the window, certainly in the churches that I was in. So it's almost like rediscovering that vision of a filmmaker, but within these spaces, whatever they may be. And to think in that way, and it was just beautiful. It was like a movie. That what you described, that scene, I could see it. I could see the light coming in, and I could see her headscarf, and what she's wearing, and all of that. So
when you were illustrating the Snow White book, I'll bet you were picturing vignettes of a little child sitting in bed reading that book.
No, she's not that nice.
No.
Look at her. He did. Oh, I didn't do it.
Yeah, I don't know. That's definitely one of the things that I didn't know what it was going to be like until it
Yes.
was done, and then when it was finished, I was like, oh, that's what it looks like, because I'd never done it before, so it was quite a risk actually.
Have you been able to have the experience of seeing children reading the book?
We've had a lot of feedback, haven't we? Yeah, my daughter.
There you go.
What about you, Vesper? Have you been able to watch children read your books and see how they react to them?
Not as much with the picture books because I don't really do school visits in that way. And but what I kept thinking of was the importance of my sketchbook, and that I don't really have any control over how the audience reacts to my work, and a lot of times it's completely unseen because I make a book and it goes out there, and maybe I get a letter from a reader or something like that. But for me, the books really come out of a lot of preparatory. I carry sketchbooks, multiple sketchbooks with me wherever I go, and I'm just always processing the world, and the books come out of that sort of indirectly. But I feel like that is sort of my interaction with the world is to try to follow that curiosity and that understanding more, and trust that the work that's coming out of that is going to be what the reader or the viewer needs at that time.
Yes.
So it's a lot of the work that never gets seen by anybody that's actually maybe more important
Although
than the
there is
finished
a lot
product.
of interaction with your sketchbook, with people. Like it does draw people.
Sure.
There is a lot of really interesting
I enjoyed
interaction.
your sketchbook.
Oh, thank you.
I've liked, commented, and subscribed.
Oh my gosh. But if anything, what I kind of hope if anybody sees that process is that they feel that maybe they could do it too, because it's just playing,
Yeah, there's not a lot of pressure.
it doesn't have to be right or perfect. It's just about it's encountering the world through that kind of play.
Beautiful. Well, maybe we should end there. Thank you, everyone. This has been a remarkable gathering. I don't know if such a group will ever gather again for a conversation like this.
Next year.
Hopefully we can.
Stay for 1 minute. I'm gonna get reaction shots.